All the data's waiting for her and the Tableau power she possesses. She can make a chicken a flock, stop bad data viz with shock, make the data tell the truth, stop a gauge chart cold, make the axis expand, change their minds, and change the world with data viz. She's the hostess with the mostest, our very own H.E. Tug Wonder Woman, Ginny Munch.
Thanks, Roshi. That is the best intro ever. Thanks everyone for joining us for our April Higher Education Tableau User Group meeting. Don't forget to tell us who your favorite superhero is in the chat. And we are recording the session, so we can share it with everyone later. So a few announcements before we get started. And actually we have quite a few announcements today. The Tableau conference is coming up May 17th through 19th. We're going to talk more about this in a breakout room later at the end of the session. I think Roshi is going to put a link in the chat box. And if you haven't already registered, you should. If you're going in person, well, lucky you. If not, the virtual option is free again this year, and I will be on the virtual option. I think Roshi is as well. And if you're into the Tableau conference, you may want to go and vote for the best tug, and we all know which one that is. In the busy nominations are open right now, and not only are they looking for people to vote for best tug of the year, which is us, but also best content creator, favorite viz of the year, etc. So definitely go check that out. And I believe Roshi put that link in the chat box as well. And then a personal favorite of mine, Analytics Day, is coming up on June 2nd. And the call for presentations is open. Registration is also open. It's free as usual. And I think you have until May 10th to get those proposals submitted. You can submit more than one. You know, we don't mind. And then if anyone else has announcements, we invite you to come off mute or put it in the chat box if you have any job announcements, open positions that you want to search for some people, some higher ed people to come work for you. Anybody? All right. Well, if you think of announcements as we go on throughout the day, just feel free to pop them in the chat box. All right, so next up, we have our Meet a Community Member of the Month. Will you advance the slide, Roshni? There we go. Awesome. All right, so I'd like to introduce you to Alicia. And Alicia, I'm going to let you say your last name so I don't butcher it entirely.
Thank you. It's just, it's Peltsch.
Peltsch, all right.
Yes.
Alicia is a manager of predictive analytics at Queen's University in Canada. We've got the links to her Twitter and Tableau public page if you'd like. She has a PhD in neuroscience, so I'm already impressed. And also was previously a manager of data collection and institutional analysis at First Nations Technical Institute, which is an Indigenous post-secondary institution in Ontario. After hours, you can likely find Alicia in or near a lake, unsalted, hanging out with her 10-year-old son or picking up yet another hobby that she has no time for. I'm with you there. So the way this is going to work is I have a list of questions for you, and we'll give Alicia the floor. So just to start off, tell us a little bit about yourself and describe your role in your team.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everyone. Some of you, if you were here last month, might have remembered I gave a presentation with Lydia, who I can see her camera is on as well, on one of our shared dashboards. So yeah, my title is Manager of Predictive Analytics, and I have been doing this for about 2.5 years now, although I graduated with my PhD back in 2011. So I've been doing various data related jobs sort of since then. it's my team. It's a kind of N of one with just me, but I work among the faculty office, the Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science at Queen's University. And so it's a fairly large faculty, I guess. You know, I very quickly want to clarify too, because I know a lot of people don't know where Queen's is. So we're not in Toronto. We're not affiliated with Toronto. We are our own distinct university. I'm going to put a little image in the chat if I can, a little map, because admittedly I don't know where a lot of places are either, but I would say in terms of distance to Toronto, it's kind of similar to say Boston and New York is how close we are. We are about 2 hours north of Syracuse. That's kind of like the closest large city. Otherwise we're halfway between Toronto and Montreal. So kind of small city. It looks like someone's been here. Yeah. Small city, maybe 125,000 people. The university makes up about 25,000 of that, right on the shore of Lake Ontario, which is gorgeous. And so, and actually I'll put this in the chat because this came out yesterday. This is our second year in a row being in the top 10 in the world for the Times Higher Ed impact rankings. So that's a big deal for us for meeting those sustainability goals. So I'll put the link there and then maybe you guys can learn a little bit about where Queen's is. But so yeah, sorry to take up time for that. I just like to sometimes clarify, we're not York and we're not Toronto. We are our own little university. I would say we're considered a medium-sized university for a Canadian university. Anyway, yes, I'm in the engineering faculty and I work in the faculty office as kind of their data scientist. You know, working with sort of student enrollment data, finance data, grades, performance data, basically anything university data, budget data, mock situations. As an example, we're thinking about restructuring some of the tuition, the way we do our tuition. And so just kind of mocking up how that will look using some data and visualizations and being able to kind of help inform some of those bigger strategies. So yeah, sorry, that was a really long answer.
No, that's fine. You kind of already answered the next question. So I'll skip to the third one.
Sure.
How do you use Tableau at work?
I use it two ways kind of. I mean, so I do make dashboards for, so far we're a relatively young Tableau group, I would say. We have about 30 licenses in engineering. Queen's other faculties use it as well. So I would say right now I make dashboards primarily for senior leadership type positions, so sort of that big picture stuff. But I also use it a lot for data requests for myself. If I get a lot of data requests for a variety of things, and having dashboards at the ready, even if that person can't access the dashboard, it gives me a way to give them the data back really quickly. And I've already curated it, and I already, you know, I trust it, and I know where it's from, and I know when I updated it last. And so I use it a lot internally as well, like for my own organization and keeping things updated.
What is your favorite Tableau project that you've worked on?
You know what? Probably the one I worked on with Lydia that we presented last month. It's been the most rewarding too, I would say, because I mean it's university wide, so it's not just for engineering. And we've had other people access it now, and it took a lot of collaborating and working together to make it really applicable and transferable across both of our faculties, and be applicable for other faculties too. And I mean, it was fun to work on together. It's more fun when you can share things with other people. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I would say that one.
How long have you been using Tableau, and how did you learn it?
So that's an interesting question. So I started using it in my last position, the one that was at the Indigenous Post-Secondary. I started using it a little bit before that. I decided I wanted to learn it by myself because I heard about it and it sounded cool. And like I didn't use it during my research or my thesis or anything. Back then we did a lot of sort of Adobe Illustrator finessing of plots that were coming out of either MATLAB or Excel or whatever else. So I wanted to learn about it. And so I want to say I took a course with Coursera or something like that. I don't know if I ever finished it, to be honest. Once I learned enough to get in there and play, then that was how I learned the best, was just getting in there and you know, messing around with stuff. So then when I was at that Indigenous Institute and they wanted some dashboards or visualizations, sort of interactive things, then I was able to really dig in and use it there. And so that's why I started to get to know, but I've learned so much more just since being at Queen's in this role. Partially, again, because of Lydia. She has been a great support, and she had been to a couple of the conferences. And so I've learned tons from playing on my own and tons from her as well. And the community that we, not just this bigger community, but we have a small community at Queen's too. And it's really great.
That's awesome. So what would you say is your favorite Tableau feature?
Oh, that's a tough one, actually. I don't know. I love it so much. To everything that isn't Power BI. I love to me. Okay, this is a silly one. I like being able to annotate things, which you can't do in some other. That's like so not a data specific feature, but I like being able to perfect example during COVID, some of the dashboards I have, you know, I can like have a highlighted area that's like this term was impacted by COVID, and I can annotate that manually. And I know, you know, we often try to get away from manual stuff, but I like having that flexibility.
What's something that you would like to learn more about?
Oh, good question. I love data visualization in general, obviously, or I wouldn't be probably at this meeting. But yeah, I would love to learn more about sort of, not the history of it, but there's so many great resources out there on visualizations and use of color and design and all of that stuff. And I'm sort of a crafty, artsy person anyway, so some of that comes a little bit naturally, but I never have time to really dig into those resources. And I would love to spend more time kind of getting into that, really like getting, because I just love it already. So yeah.
So if you could go back in time and tell Tableau newbie you one thing, what would that be?
I think one thing that I struggled with, I guess, as a newbie, was I kept thinking I would be able to do things that I did in like typical Microsoft environments, like selecting multiple things at once and doing something to them all at the same time. And so like just that early on knowledge of like, just stop, but like set aside sort of your previous expectations of what buttons do what, and just get it, like find a demo or a video and just really get in there with the basics to learn some of the different approaches, because it wasn't necessarily super intuitive to me right away, like without getting some of those, until I got into it a bit and then could play around.
So do you use Tableau outside of work? I think you said earlier that you wanted to learn it outside of work. So.
Oh, well, and just, yeah, learn more of the, like, I don't use it outside of work, but learn more of the sort of design and the aesthetics piece. I mean, I think I do a decent job of making things really nice looking, but yeah, just learning some more tools more tools in my toolbox, I guess.
So are you team floating or team tiled?
I am strongly team floating, but with containers. Which I didn't know about containers right away. And so I was just team floating and a little bit irritated that I couldn't line things up just right, but I did not want tiles. And then when I learned about containers, there was a big sigh of relief, because I can line things up just right, but still put them flexibly where I want to.
Yes. And are you a bigger fan of sets or parameters?
I have not really fully understood parameters yet, so I'm going to say sets by default. But to be honest, I end up using groups a lot and calculated fields, because I just am not super strong in that. I want to be better at parameters. I just haven't really taken the time to get a really good lesson on them, and I haven't used them that much. So I end up sort of using groups and calculations a lot.
I feel that way about sets. I just don't know enough about them.
Yeah.
So is there anything else you want to share before we start the lightning round?
No, I guess I would say, like, if I have to, I said no, and then I kept talking. I talk a lot. I would say one of my data strengths, I guess, is making data easy to digest for a large audience, that, like, for, you know, a child to a grandmother to everyone in between, is sort of, and I mean, that's thanks to some of my training in my PhD. My supervisor was really good at that, and so that just kind of translated, and so I really enjoy, that's part of what I really enjoy about data visualizations, is that making stuff really meaningful and easy to understand and digestible.
So before we hop into the lightning round, since it is Superhero Day, we wanted to ask, what is your data superpower? And this isn't just for you, but for everyone in the room, put it in the chat box.
Data superpower. I mean, I think it's just that sort of, yeah, making data easy to understand for sort of the average person, not even for an average data consumer, just for everyone. And I joke that my general superpower, you know, people say that everybody has a superpower. I joke that my general superpower is I know someone for that. That's I'm just naturally really extroverted, and so chances are, if you need someone to do something, I will probably know someone for that. That's kind of my joking, my ongoing superpower that I joke about with friends.
Awesome. Well, now we'll get into the lightning round. We've got some pictures to go with these. First up, Marvel or DC?
I don't see any. I feel like I'm not seeing what you're seeing. I don't see any pictures, but it doesn't matter. Whichever one is Thor. I don't know. Whichever one has Chris Hemsworth as Thor. That one.
All right. How about Batman or Superman?
Aquaman, definitely.
Aquaman. Batgirl or Robin? I'm
gonna say Batgirl, because Robin seems kind of irritating. I don't really know what Batgirl's shtick is, but
okay, Wonder Woman or Supergirl?
Wonder Woman, I think.
Yay! All right, so the next up is the Powerpuff Girls. Bubbles, Blossom, or Buttercup?
I don't know who any of those are, but I would say I like the name Bubbles best.
Me too. Now we're gonna look at some data superheroes. First up, Edward Tufte or Stephen Few?
For that one, I think Tufte.
Okay.
It's just, yeah, easier to look at. Not the person, the visualizations.
Yeah.
Unlike the superhero question I was talking about looking at there.
Next, William Playfair or W.E.B. Du Bois?
No, I don't know. I'm going to say Playfair. I don't know who the other one is.
Well, then you should come to Analytics Day and you'll find out.
Thank you.
Next up, Florence Nightingale or Jon Snow? No, Roshni, not that Jon Snow. that
I mean, definitely that Jon Snow. No, you know what? Those are tied for me. I like them both. Both like really, yeah, really historical, neat stories.
Yeah, they definitely have some great storytelling there.
Yeah, I can't choose one unless I can choose Jon Snow from Game of Thrones. Then.
There you go. Well, that wraps up our lightning round and our Meet a Community member for the month of April. If anyone is interested in being our featured community member in the future, please reach out and let us know. And Alicia, thank you so much for agreeing to be our guest this month.
Yeah, it was fun. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Right. So I'm going to turn it over to Roshni.
So next up, we have Andrew Drinkwater, who we're going to continue the Canada theme. I mean, today's just a day of the North. So Andrew is the host of the Canadian Higher Education Tableau user group. Hey, Canada has an HE tug. He's a former Tableau instructor at the British Columbia Institute of Technology. He's a certified Tableau associate. and a board member at the Canadian Association of Institutional Research and Planning, which is not abbreviated CAIRP, but instead is CIRPA. And he's also the president and founder of Plaid Analytics. You would think, because it's Canada, that it would be Plaid Analytics, but no, it's Plaid. And Plaid Analytics builds strategic enrollment management analytics solutions for colleges and universities. So Andrew, whenever you're ready to share.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning if you're maybe in Hawaii. Thanks very much for joining today, and thanks for having me. So today we're going to talk about tips and tricks related to Tableau relationships and joins. We'll go through some of the conceptual background as well, based on some of the questions that I saw in Slack. So bear with me a moment while I share my screen, and we will go from there. Okay, so we're going to talk about tips and tricks, and we'll talk about some conceptual pieces along the way as well. So without further ado, let's go. Okay, so I wanted to mention just up front, there is a lot of material on joins and relationships, and I have 15 minutes. I will try to cover some of it, but I guarantee you I cannot cover all of it, no matter how quickly I talk. So there's a sources slide at the end. I recommend having a look at some of those resources. They're great, and there's been some new ones created since as well. Okay, so let's talk about some of the concepts related to bringing in different data. So we'll talk about joins, relationships, and a tiny bit about blends, and go through some examples and a live demo. Okay, so joins nominally allow you to combine two different tables. We'll say that this is table A and table B, and we're going to combine them to create a single table, table C. There's a few different kinds of joins. So row level joins means that every row in one table joins to every other row in another table. So if we think of students and population, we can have two tables that look somewhat like this. And when we join them, we create a third table that looks somewhat like this. Now, what you may have noticed is that our population metrics have doubled in some cases. And this may be problematic when we go to aggregate our data. So we'll go through a live example of that in a little bit as well. As you can see, we've doubled in Ontario and Alberta. Aggregate joins are a little bit different. So we aggregate the data first. So our table on the left, we aggregate to the number of students, and then we join them, and we get an accurate number of students and an accurate population. The downside here is we lost the information on what institutions those students attend, which may or may not be all that great for our reporting purposes. So row level joins have a fixed output, and theoretically, when you create them, aggregate joins can have variable outputs. So this concept forms some of the basis for where relationships came from. So a relationship's a more flexible way to combine data from multiple tables than joins. It's essentially kind of like a contract between the two tables that says how they relate, but the joins themselves are performed at runtime when they're needed. So some of the reasons that I find relationships are really helpful, you can do less data preparation, so you can use the same data source for more kinds of questions. It's more nimble, essentially. This can also help promote trust, so people can see all the data if they're working through it, and they can see better how it is, how it's related together. And in particular, you should have zero chance of ending up with that duplicate set of numbers like we saw earlier. So relationships bring together multiple tables in essentially layers. So they're much more flexible. The joins are created on the fly, as I mentioned. They're based on what you have on your visualization. I kind of talked about this already. So some background information on this. The input to joins are physical tables. Physical in this sense means they exist in your database or spreadsheet. It doesn't necessarily mean they're real in the real world sense of it. The output of a join is a logical table. The joins are fixed though. So when you create the data source, you tell it how the joins work, and that's what's going to be in your table every time as a result. Relationships are a little bit different. So the output is logical tables, which may contain physical tables, and we'll go through that in just a second. Their output is essentially a definition for how to query it, but the actual query is run when you put stuff onto your view. The join types are flexible. So Tableau, as a general rule, decides what join makes the most sense. And only tables in the visualization are included in the query. So it can be more efficient than a standard join where it's applicable. Say you're only using 2 of the 5 tables in your relationship. Tableau is only going to bring in those 2 for that specific visualization. Oops. Okay, we're not going to talk too much about blends. Probably the biggest difference here is blends themselves cannot be published to Tableau server or online, but they can be published as separate data sources. So you make the blend in the workbook that uses it rather than in the data source that's published. Blends really have a primary and secondary. Relationships are more equal. Blends are basically a glorified left join, and that's all they support. So your most granular table has to be the primary, and your least granular has to be the secondary. If you do it the other way around, you're going to get a lot of stars as your result. Performance varies, but tends to be better with relationships. The one thing that I will say for blends, though, is that sometimes you want to make your relationship a little bit more dynamic on the key fields. And so maybe you can use the same data source for multiple different blending purposes, depending on which key you identify. To me, that's about the last use case where blends are really interesting, because you could have a different blend relationship on each visualization that you make. Okay, so we're going to talk a lot about applicants versus targets today, and that'll be our live demo as well. And then we'll have some other examples where we'll just discuss them in the interest of time. So, a standard question is, are we on track to meet our targets? Let's compare how these things work. So in terms of the data model for relationships, we want to bring together applicants and targets. Now, as you know, if you work in this space, there are a lot of applicants, call it thousands per year, and there's a very small number of targets, call it tens at most per year. So this concept forms what Tableau calls the logical layer. This is the part that you're greeted with in versions newer than 2020.2 or newer. This is the data canvas that you're greeted with. And then you can drill into it to get to the physical layer, which consists of the joins that have been around for a very long time, since the beginning of Tableau. So our logical layer consists of applicants and targets. So our targets is actually pretty simple. We have, say, a spreadsheet worth of intake targets by program and by year, something like that. That is our physical layer. So in a lot of ways, it's one and the same for the targets. It's only a single table. However, for applicants, maybe we have some additional information. So we have a table of applications in our database, a table that says what these different program codes actually mean, so they're human readable, a table of terms, same kind of story, and national status. So in this context, domestic versus international. And so that those 4 physical tables on the left make up our applicants logical table. That's on the top left. More generally, we have logical tables and a relationship or contract between them. They can consist of many tables in the physical layer, as many as you want, theoretically, though my personal experience is once you get beyond about 20, you may be better to consider building views in the database for some of these tables. Okay, so another example, if you think of students active in terms and their applications, so many students, those who make it past first term, will have more than one term record, and they might have one or many application records. And this is where relationships can be really helpful. So they can handle many-to-many relationships, and you can define conditions in Tableau for what you want to keep and what you don't. And so same kind of concept, our students might consist of a fact table, dimensions related to their terms, such as, were they eligible for financial aid and did they receive it and that sort of stuff. And then terms, so just, take probably a term ID from fact student term and turn that into maybe a term code. And then our applications could consist of something similar, but focused on their applications. Okay, so a few examples, and then we'll get into our demo. So the demo that we'll go through live is around actuals versus targets for applications, that is. But the same concept would apply if you're working with budget data or current students, et cetera, et cetera. And then I'll briefly discuss some of these other examples as well. So in terms of thinking of different levels of aggregation, one example of a project that we worked on was around student aid eligibility. And this was for a college that offered hundreds of programs to tens of thousands of students. And what they wanted to try and figure out was, were their programs meeting the requirements of the student aid in their jurisdiction? So as an example, maybe you have to complete a diploma program within 2 years of starting it in order for that program to be eligible for student aid and the students within it to be able to receive their money. And so what this college wanted to know is, how are we doing in terms of this eligibility? We haven't really looked at it in detail before, but we have some suspicions based on our advising appointments that maybe certain programs actually aren't offering their courses frequently enough. So they wanted to better understand that. So what we ended up doing here was looking at a few different things. We brought together information on what courses were required for each program. So that was one data set. And in this case, they didn't have access at that point in time to DegreeWorks. And so we ended up scraping the website to get this information in order to be able to move forward with the project, which was an interesting sidebar. Once we had what courses were required for each program, we then wanted to know what were the eligibility requirements for student aid purposes for each of those types of programs. And so that's the same example. You have 2 years to finish a diploma program. We then said, when did they offer these courses? And compared that. So let's say you had 2 years to complete a diploma program starting in 2018 fall. This means by 2020 summer, all of the courses that you needed to complete that credential should have been offered at least once by the college. And a more advanced look at this would be, should have been offered and had enough space available for the students, which isn't always the same thing. And so relationships help us answer interesting questions. So if you think of different levels of detail within this idea of student aid eligibility, if you think of it at the most granular for our purposes, it's, was the individual course offered or not within the time window that we're looking at, call it 2 years. That's a good start. We then start to combine it with different types of requirement groups for the particular program. So we can think of that as every student completing a diploma in accounting has to take accounting 110 and accounting 120 and 3 courses from this list of 6 other accounting courses and an English course and so on. And so then the next level would be roll the data up to that level to say, for each of these requirements, has the student met it? And the hardest part there is pick 3 of 6 kind of list. You can then aggregate up another level and say, okay, we know all the requirements. We have, say, 5 different sets of requirements, and 3 of them have been met. But that means that the program as a whole has not met the requirements. Now, if we go in Tableau and we work from a high level on downwards, we can pick a particular program that looks like it wasn't eligible. We can drill through and say, why was it not eligible? And say 3 of our 6 requirement groups were not met. We can then drill into those and we can discover that maybe they forgot to offer accounting 120. Or more likely, maybe accounting 120 has turned into a different course, but this isn't coded well in the data that was provided. And so it opens up opportunities for conversations.
Hey, Andrew, can you pause for a second? It looks
Yes.
like we're still seeing the PowerPoint. Are we supposed to be seeing Tableau instead?
PowerPoint for another minute and then we're live.
Oh, okay, great.
Good
Sorry.
question.
Thanks.
No problem. Okay, realizing I have about 6 minutes left. Students and courses. So if you think of students and what courses they enrolled in, this is a great example for Tableau relationships. So students in particular terms, and then they take 1 or more courses. This is a good way to drill through your data. Row level security can work well with this as well. So it's a more complicated concept, but the advantage to using relationships for it is you're not creating a row for every one of your users. The tables are pulled in separately and brought together when they're necessary. Okay, so let's flip to Tableau. Thank you for the reminder there. And let's go through some of our examples.
All right, well, as you're going through the examples, feel free to take your time. We have the room until I think 4:30, so we
Okay.
do have another presentation after you, but yeah, take your time.
Okay, sounds great. All right. So as mentioned, we're going to go through applicants versus targets. And I'll just start with an Excel file that should look a little bit familiar. And what we're going to do is we're going to walk through the differences between joins and relationships, at least some of the differences. So in the old paradigm, where only joins were possible, what we would have had to do is we would have had to start with our applicants and then pretend relationships don't exist. We would drill into the physical layer and we would combine them with targets. Or at least if we wanted to use joins, this is how I would logically think to do it. And so when we do that, we get something that looks like this. So if we take our admission cycle year and we've got 3 years worth of data and we look at how many people are registered at the end of the cycle or similar, and we then compare it to our targets, we can see that our targets have been multiplied effectively by the number of rows that are in our data. So we can see here that we've got, in the middle row, we've got 1 million for our targets, which would be the biggest institution the world has ever seen. And maybe that's our goal, but it's a difficult target to be able to reach. So to counteract that, in the old days, we'd use a data blend. And that worked pretty well at a high level like this, but it did have some of the limitations around if our blend, our secondary data source, so the targets in this example, it had some limitations if there was more granularity to the targets than how we could relate it to the applicants. And so blends worked, but they were a little bit finicky. Relationships, on the other hand, work very well for this purpose. So if we go back to our basic data set and drag that onto Tableau again, instead of using the physical layer, we can use the logical layer to define how these two pieces are related. And what we can see here is that Tableau actually picked up application cycle year for me, so I didn't have to pre-populate that. The same is generally true in the physical layer as long as the fields are named the same. So now let's go and build the same kind of thing, but using our second example here. So now, if we put our admission cycle year onto the sheet and our number of registered and our targets, we can now see that we're a little bit above target. And there's a reason for this. I've got every date in this example. So a way to deal with that would be to bring in a level of detail expression to handle that problem. So what we're saying here is pick up the max reporting date ID across the for each of the admission cycles and have it be equal to the reporting date ID at the row level. So now if I filter and keep only true, I'll close the calculated field so you can actually see that. We can see now, apparently we have 0 registrants, which is troubling and suggests that our applications versus target is not quite working. Okay. It's possible I am having a live data issue. So let's walk through my backup plan just to make sure that I didn't mistakenly delete the registration records or something, and we'll talk through them and then I'll show how the relationship pieces work. Okay, so what we would have seen theoretically is that we have a very small number of applicants, so 36, and this is largely because my anonymization technique nuked all of them and I had to rebuild them. So it's a very, very small institution for this example. So what we can see is that we're a little bit above the target in 2020, bang on in 2021, and a little bit below the target in 2022. This compared with, if we did it as a join, is a lot more optimal. Okay, so the next example concerns how do we build out relationships. So relationships will work perfectly fine for this example where we have a whole bunch of date IDs on our applicant table, and we want to bring in essentially duplicates of the date table to be able to work with that. So let's go back to our live workbook and see how that looks. And I bring this one up because Lisa Sherd, I'm not sure if you're on the line, but had mentioned in the Slack space that she was having some issues determining how to best hide extra fields after making a join a relationship. So let's see what this looks like. And I'm going to simplify it in the interests of time, but let's bring in 2 examples of our date table just so we can see what this would look like as a relationship. So let's make the first one our reporting dates so we can figure out what date this data is actually valid for, and then we'll bring in application dates. Okay, so we'll rename the tables so that we can see a bit more information here. Reporting date. And Tableau will resort these alphabetically for better or worse. So if you're the type who really wants your tables organized in a specific way visually, you have to name them accordingly. Okay, so in relationships, a good way to hide data is actually before you get to the canvas. So as an example, we see this a lot in date dimension tables. They've pre-calculated the weekday name and the day of the month and the year, et cetera, but Tableau is really good at this in a built-in way. You actually don't need all those fields. So select all the fields and right-click the ones you don't care about and hit hide. And you can then double-click and rename the field that you do care about to be application date. And then we do the same thing with reporting date. And so we'll hide everything except for reporting date and hit hide. So now, right. Oh yeah, so that's a gotcha. You can't name a field the same thing that you've named a logical table. You could put a space after it if you wanted to, but it'd probably be better to rename your logical table if you really wanted to use reporting date like that. The other thing is, if all of your existing tables are logical, like we have here, then you could also right-click and hide irrelevant fields in this canvas. Okay, last example with the dates, just to illustrate one last point. So what I would recommend though, is for things like dates where there's only going to be one value ever returned. So we only have one application date ID per application, per student, per term as an example. Dates are actually better in the physical layer because you don't need the additional logic performed on them, because it's always going to be an inner join because you, or a left join potentially depending on your data, because you should always have a match here. So the physical layer actually works better for things like dates, basically because it's faster. The same concept in terms of how you can hide the dates works. So let's add one more date here just so we have 2 tables and join it based on date ID. And now in the physical layer, what we can see here is that we have the physical table name. So what we want to do is we want to scroll down and find our dates and admission dates and actually only keep the fields that are called date. So we'll hide those. Maybe we want to bring back our fiscal years later, but that's the rough ID. I just hid every field. Let's try that one more time. Okay. So keep the date, otherwise you've basically hidden the whole table and there's no point. And so now we have 2 date fields and we could name this admit date, and I think the other one was application date. So something like that. Now when we go and look at our data source for this last one, we've got our application date here and our admit date here. Okay, so let's go back to the the PowerPoint now and talk about some of the other sort of tips and tricks. So we talked about targets versus applicants. The same concept would work for any other kind of target. So this is looking at a survey and saying, what is the work integrated learning target from the government, and how is the institution doing in terms of jobs after graduation for those students who participated in work integrated learning. So in closing, this was really quick and didn't cover everything on relationships and joins, but I would encourage you to dig into them further. They can be really helpful. So they're more versatile than a join, and they can answer more questions. You generally won't have missing or duplicated data, but the one caveat I'll add to this is sometimes when you combine data from two different logical tables, Tableau is going to assume that you wanted an inner join. So only a match on both sides. If that happens, and in fact, you wanted to keep fields from, say, your table on the left that did not have a match from the table on the right, the way around that is to use the count field. Where's the relationship? Okay, here's a relationship example. So we could imagine if there was no match on the dates tables for students for some reason. If we wanted to make sure that all of our students would show up, even if they didn't have a date, put the count of that table onto at least detail, and that'll tell Tableau that actually you probably wanted a left join. So keep examples from applicants where there's no application date. Okay, so some rules of thumb. Joins typically work better where the cardinality is 1-to-1 or many-to-one. So the way to think about this is, what is the core granularity of my data? So less granular, think of validation tables or program lookup tables or date tables, as we saw today. Those are better served as a join. If the granularity is more than the other table that you want to bring it together with, so say students versus the courses they registered in, that should be a relationship, because for a single student, there will be many courses. This will ensure that your count of students from the student side works properly without any manipulation, and your count of registered courses from the course side works properly. And then you can even show the individual courses if you want to, and you're still not going to break your other counts. So relationships work better where the relationship is different granularity, particularly the many-to-many. I've also heard that for people that are new to Tableau, relationships are a lot easier to understand. I've been using Tableau for about 15 years, so this one's a little harder for me, but that's one thing I've heard from new users, is that they find the concept simpler than joins. If all else fails, try blends. So sometimes there's a case for a blend that you apply a blend relationship at the worksheet level as opposed to the data source level. Blends are still really helpful there. Okay, I will say thank you and welcome follow-up questions by all means. And to the higher ed user group, thank you so much for including me today, and my hat's off to you on organizing a great user group that we can all learn a lot from how you've organized it. So thanks everybody, and questions are welcome through LinkedIn or here.
Thanks, Andrew. That was a whole lot of really good information on relationships. It was amazing. Well, I mean, honestly, I think your demo pretty much answered a lot of the questions people might have had about what the difference between the two were and when to use them. One question that did come up a lot, there was a lot of discussion in the chat, was what tool were you using to annotate?
Oh, to annotate in Tableau or PowerPoint? Yeah.
In whatever, whenever you're drawing the arrows.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Yes. I will throw it in the chat after, but the tool is called Demo Pro. I believe it only works on the Mac, but there is a Windows equivalent that if you Google Demo Pro Windows equivalent, that'll show up. So yeah, you can do lots of fun things with it, like draw smiley faces or annotate with arrows. It makes maybe what is otherwise a nervous presenter a little bit less nervous. It really helps to draw attention.
Yeah, it worked. You used it really effectively. People, as you know, probably we were able to see exactly what you were pointing to. So that was great. I think that's all we have time for now. So if you do have questions for Andrew, throw them in the chat. Andrew's also in our Slack space, so you can throw them there or contact him on LinkedIn. And somewhere in the chat, if you scroll up a whole bunch, his LinkedIn information is in there too. So thank you so much, Andrew. That was great. All right. Jenny, I'm going to pass it on to you.
All right, and I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Rebecca Carr is joining us from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. She is currently serving as Associate Director of Institutional Research at Southeast Community College and has long been an advocate for adopting best practices in presentations and data visualization. She says, save the pies for dessert. She lives in Lincoln, Nebraska with her husband and their fuzzy dog you can see in her photo on the slide. So, Rebecca, I will turn it over to you and let you share your screen.
Great. So the thing I have to talk to you about today is a kind of a non-standard use of Tableau for survey data. And we have used this very successfully on a couple of occasions. But before we get into that, kind of the question of the day was, who is your favorite superhero? And you got a little bit of a unexpected preview. Mine is Super Grover. He's just delightful on all fronts, and go for Super Grover. But back to the reason that we're actually here, which is kind of a different way to use survey data. When we usually think about summarizing survey data with Tableau, we think about this kind of thing, like lots of people responses to a single question or set of questions to try to have insights into how a group thinks. In this case that we did a couple of years ago, one of the insights is we've got some problems with services and food in the cafeteria. That is not what we're going to talk about today. Usually people want to know what a lot of people think and say about one thing at a time. Again, that is not what we're going to talk about today. If you want to know more about that, I highly recommend Data Revelations and Steve Wexler. He's kind of the resource I use for kind of my regular survey data summarization. So again, instead of what we usually want to know, in this case, the question that we were trying to answer was, what does one person think about a lot of things at the same time? And the reason this came up, the context for this, is that we shifted to a fully online new student enrollment for the summer 2020 term. Not surprisingly, it was largely driven by the pandemic. So new student enrollment was shifted over to a Canvas-based course that students completed on their own time. And they walked through a set of modules. The final assignment in the Canvas course was a Qualtrics survey that we called the advising inventory. And it was designed to replace a paper and pencil form that used to be filled out by the student and then put in that student's folder, their advising record for advisors to use as a reference for the kinds of resources that a student might need and those kinds of things. And just as a kind of a visual, I'm very much a visual learner, the task was to recreate something like this using Qualtrics and Tableau. And the path to get there was quite complicated. We had a lot of different software and a lot of different problem solving to come up with this solution. Again, I'm not going to talk about all of this. The part I'm going to talk about today is kind of the Tableau desktop component and the part of that is published over to Tableau server. If you want more information about the rest of this, I'd be delighted to talk to you about that more offline. So as a kind of a sneak peek, this is kind of what a version of the new student profile of the advising inventory looks like now. And just as I've got that noted down in the corner, I'm going to do a demo that's connected to our live data, but all the names have been shifted over to names and IDs, and contact information have been shifted over to calculated fields that are all anonymized. So in the sheet, the summary sheet, we've got things like the contact information, their previous college experience, their upcoming plans for future college, got contact information, and then some information about concerns that those students have. And what we are going to do now is shift over to Tableau. And I had to get my friend Grover in a second time. And, oops, I went too far. So, as I mentioned, the back end for this, there's lots of different pieces. For anybody who has used a direct connection between Qualtrics and Tableau, you will know that there are strengths and weaknesses on that front. Some of them, I will show you a smidgen of those today that are related to the display. Another part that are related to the display that I actually won't show today are that there's a lot of aliases to clean up. I don't want to show null on any of these. The word null is not meaningful to advisors, so there's a lot of null turning into a period. So as you can see, kind of as I hover, there's lots of different displays within the profile sheet. And as things come over from Qualtrics, one of the complicating factors are the matrix items. So this is for starting with an example of a non-matrix item. So this is kind of the field name and the values for the field name, and then we know kind of what a student's response is from there. We can have similar kinds of information related to non-matrix items. Matrix items, on the other hand, are those that either have check all that apply, or where you have one prompt and you want them to respond to each individual item within that block or that matrix. And as you might guess, these are the fields, question type, question ID, question description, that come over with the direct connection to Qualtrics. In order to kind of make this useful, these fields useful downstream, we have to create some calculated fields. The ones that I'm showing here in blue are those calculated fields. And I use kind of naming conventions, so question blank type. Question space is one of those things that are the Qualtrics things. So my naming convention is I use Q and no space to know that, remind myself that these are my calculated fields. And the Q number is pretty straightforward. It's taking, this is a group of items that I need to put together. So those are grouping those together. Otherwise, it's just the left three items for left three characters from QID. And that puts all these pieces together in a way that's helpful to me. Then QID, of course, we can see here that this one is related to, well, here, let's use difficult subjects. So students are asked to identify which of the subjects are their strongest subjects and their difficult subjects, and they can choose check or not check each item. And from the information in question ID, we can tell what it is, but again, we don't want to display Q30 parentheses English end parentheses. So this Q detail is the other calculated field that's necessary to make this happen. And basically what we're doing is just taking kind of everything that starts from the first parenthesis, not sure what the singular parenthesis is, until the end. And that gives us the values for Q detail. And obviously you can see here that the difference between these items, these here are check all that apply. They're labeled matrix, where we're asking each student to respond to each item in this matrix. So we didn't actually have to do anything different here. So the Q detail, the calculation for Q detail is not used. So with that as kind of as much background as I'll talk about right now related to the displays, we'll go into this, and these are set to refresh at the top of every hour. So this should be, this might change as we go. So what the advisor gets, there are basically two pieces that are published to CIRPA. One is this sheet that the director of advising will get, and so she'll look and see who are the new students who have finished new student enrollment, and then her task is then to assign them an advisor. So what she will do is come to this sheet, and I'm going to choose this person. I'm not exactly sure what that will do. So using a dashboard action, we're moving from the that summary sheet to the advising inventory for that selected student. And that makes things easy for the director of advising. She doesn't have to go through a list of 1,000 IDs to try to figure out which student she needs to print a profile of, and those kinds of things. What the director of advising would do with this, just to kind of close that loop for you, is she would print this to PDF, get it to the advisor, and then it would go into that student's record. So it took considerable trial and error to get to this point. And as you can see, this is not a standard way that we tend to look at survey data. This is literally all the answers from one student and one student only. And it looks like this is a decent selection. So I'm going to stick with this person. And so let me just show you some of the ways that these are put together. So, and I've got them unhidden down here as a reminder to myself. So this is the first kind of contact information sheet, and you can see that the columns and rows are just completely empty. In the filters, we've got term, and then this action filter. And this is a function that's there because of that dashboard action where we're selecting one student. That applies to all the records. And then what's in here, this is just the title, a very, very full, vaguely formatted title. And putting this together is just kind of bringing all the fields over that we want to include in the title, and putting them together in ways that will make as much sense as possible. So this is literally everything is in a title. And you'll notice here that this is a polygon that's selected. One of the things that I don't remember who I learned that from, but if we were to have that be automatic, we've got this kind of goofy indicator that something is missing. But using polygon will hide that, and the title stands alone in that way. This idea of just using the title to display the content is used in many places. So we've got this for the career goals. This is 3 different fields along with the sheet name. This I want to take classes is a little bit different. So in the title, we've got 2 of the responses to 2 of the questions in the title, but then also this one is using the answers to Q10. So I've got my my specific answer and everything that they selected true to, everything that they indicated, yes, this fit, this is me, is the true for Q10. So if they had said also in the morning, then the morning would show up as well. This idea gets played out multiple times as well. So we've also got that one kind of here. So here is the version of Q21 and the different ways that they're going to pay for college. This kind of the difficult subjects, she must not have indicated that any subjects were strengths. So the student says she's got difficult subjects in math and science. And the titles on some of these are just straight up titles, whether it is the sheet name or whether I type the title in individually. Most of the time I'm using the sheet name though. So I'm gonna skip over down to some of these other ones. This hours expected, this is another kind of biggie, and you can, I'm gonna point this studied hours line out first. So if you look carefully, it's studied 0 to 2 hours, period, in high school at previous college. And the reason that period is there is because there are actually 2 fields that might go there. And depending on whether the student is a brand new student to higher education, or if they're a transfer student, they'll get different versions of the survey. And so in this case, there are 2 different questions that I'm putting into one place. And by having the alias on null for both of them, lets this one line work regardless of whether they're the transfer path or they're the new student path. So then the next, these look a little bit more standard Tableau-y. So again, we're showing one question, and these are only items that new students get. So transfer students don't get these. And then what we are adding here is this kind of question description. And this is one where we're asking them to respond to all of the items. So this is not part of the calculated field. This is how it came over directly from Qualtrics. And then we've got their answer in text, and then the color is kind of logically, colors being used to highlight those things that the advisor might be specifically interested in. This person didn't answer any very concerns, but very concerned is also an answer. That is the kind of the straight up dark orange. So that's kind of a big block. And then this last one, new students are asked how like you are a series of different questions from 1, not like me at all, to 7, very like me. Some are reverse coded. So then we're just literally displaying their answer to each question and having color indicate whether they're positively coded or negatively coded. So in this case, When I have a deadline, I often waste time doing other things. Ideally, that would be lower, which is why we've got the different color on that. So when all those pieces get put together, we end up with a sheet like this. There was a lot of challenges in this, and the last one that I'm going to talk about is fitting all of this content onto a single page. Because since the goal is to have this printed out as a PDF document, we really want to get it on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. So the letter portrait is the size of this dashboard. In terms of the layout, I am, in this case, using the containers. I think they're tiled rather than floating. One of the things that I had to pay attention to was which of these, I need to move my meeting controls out of the way, which of these take up the entire view and which of them take up just fit width. Because then that's more important on this column of the information. For transfer students, of course, they don't have this block at all. And if we were to use an entire view on some of these others, it would spread out in such a way that it makes it completely unusable. Another thing that I had to think about was whether some of them are fixed height or not fixed height. The one that's probably the most important fixed height one is this kind of best way to contact. We need to make sure that those are legible because that is high value information for the advisors as they're getting the content. So that is a fixed height to make sure that it doesn't squeeze down and become more illegible. Let me just show you, since I've talked about it. So that was a student who's never completed college courses. Let's look at somebody else who is she went the other route, or I don't even know what gender these people are. I'm going to find one who is, did I try that one already? There we go. So this is a transfer student, and again, this information is empty because they didn't respond to any of that content. And then if you look here, this studied, we've got that period indicating a null value at the front instead of at the end. And then kind of the rest of it all fits together as well as possible. So this has gone over very well. They are super delighted to have this. There are a lot of challenges using Qualtrics as a direct data source. Again, I won't go into that because I literally spent weeks of my life figuring that out. You don't need to live through that pain. That is what I have to show you today. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to take questions with whatever time there is left.
We do have a question in the chat. Let me scroll back up. There's been a lot of chatter. They're loving your absolutely loving your presentation.
Oh, good.
Yeah. You personally inspired me to redo a survey dashboard that I've created for the past 3 years and make it a little bit more, sized down. I feel like the way I have it now is too many borders, too many boxes, and this is a nice sized down version. All right, so we had a question. Let's see. I don't think I've seen individual level responses to surveys visualized in our institution. I might have missed you saying at the beginning, but how do you handle permissions for this given the sensitive nature of the data?
Good question. The students know upfront before they finish the survey that the information is going to be shared directly with the advisor. So there's a notification of that in the Qualtrics survey, in the Canvas and in the Qualtrics.
Excellent. Question. Oh, there are several people who would like to know if you can share like a sample workbook with anonymized data or anything online for them to kind of download and see how it works behind the scenes.
I will tentatively say yes.
Okay.
I'll need to make sure that I can do that in such a way, because right now, I don't know if you noticed, but I do right now still have the real names in here. I'm just using these calculated field for the anonymous things. So if there's a way I can do it and not kill the information that is there, I would be happy to do so.
Or if someone wants to spend their National Superhero Day evening using superhero data to do something similar, that's an option. Takers?
We can always send out a superhero survey.
Put out the bat, what's the bat signal?
Bat signal, yeah.
Bat signal, yeah.
There's another question asking why you chose Tableau for this task specifically. Amazing job, by the way.
Why did I choose Tableau? I think the easy answer is it's the only thing I thought of that would allow me to do this. And it's my go-to tool of choice. And so I tend to be like, can I do it in Tableau? Yes, then I go down that route. I don't really explore other options. I'm not sure how, I don't know how else I would have done it.
We did have one person ask if you could demonstrate how you choose the individual student again. Was it a parameter or filter?
Yeah, so that is a dashboard action, and it is showing. So on this kind of overview sheet from both the this listing here and this null listing, the reason there are null students is if they, well, that doesn't matter. From either listing of students, then it is, if you select from either of those, it will affect a different dashboard and all the different visualizations, all the different components of the different dashboard. And so it is a dashboard action. And again, the way that works is I'm going to select a student here. This is my second sheet that is affected by that dashboard action. And that filter, actually, I don't think I showed the filter part on that one. And then it is using the field anonymous ID to, on this sheet, to affect everything on the other set of sheets.
I want to, while you have this window open, I want to point something out. This is a really cool case of using a filter action to filter a different dashboard. A lot of times when we're using filter actions, we're saying, okay, we have a summary, I have detail at the bottom, I'm going to use the summary to filter the detail. Here, you're using an entirely different, your target dashboard is an entirely different dashboard. And so it not only does the filtering, but it switches you to that tab. And that's a pretty cool use of the filter actions.
Right. And it's very friendly for the end user too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We had someone ask if you could replace Qualtrics direct connection with something different, what would you choose?
If I had any programming skills that would be applicable to do it, I would love to just be able to have a direct pull without relying on their software. I would take control of it myself and do that programming and everything myself. I don't have time to learn how to do that, and so I haven't learned to do that, and I rely on their tool and make the best use of it as I can.
Did you manipulate the data in Qualtrics, or sorry, the Qualtrics data in Tableau or another tool?
So the data source, let me kind of remind you of what I showed here. So I showed the data viz, but I also used desktop to create the Qualtrics data source, as well as an access data source, which you don't care about. But I have a separate Tableau file that is used this is where I'm publishing the data source from. This is my published data source. And this is pretty much just bringing everything in the way that I want it to. And then there are a lot of things, you can see all of these are called aliases. So all of these, everywhere there's a dot I've created an alias. And I've had to do this enough times that doing it, having it set up like this reminds me of what aliases need to be adapted when I need to bring in something new. And I'm pretty sure I don't have any student. Yeah, so this is the last time I published a data source, we changed the survey. Every time you change the survey, you have to change the data source from Qualtrics and literally start all of this over.
Are you you're using the web data connector, the Tableau Qualtrics web data connector direct, and just following the instructions there and doing whatever
Yes.
configuring of questions and all of that there?
Yes.
Cool. There was a question about, giving a demo of that. Maybe if anyone wants to volunteer to do a demo at a future Tableau user group presentation or Tableau user group meeting about using the Qualtrics web data connector, let us know. We can definitely have someone on show that quick tip and trick.
That would be great.
We have a couple others ask if you had thought about using Tableau Prep or Alteryx or any of those ETL.
I absolutely did. You cannot use a web data connector as a source in Tableau Prep. So that got dismissed pretty quickly because the Qualtrics path is a web data connector. So it cannot be a source in Prep.
We had another question about, is there any row level security being applied to the dashboard to limit advisors' access to specific students?
Right now, no. And that is largely because there are only two people, kind of the top of advising are the ones getting this. It's not the individual advisors. The individual advisors get the PDF that the other folks produce. If that was not the case and they were coming in directly, then yes, I'd try to add some row level security, but at this point it hasn't been necessary.
Okay. I think that is all the questions. If I missed your question, put it back in the chat again, please, because I think it was very easy to miss something. There's a lot going on in that chat box. And I encourage you, Rebecca, to just read through the comments because you've got a lot of accolades in there.
Yeah, great. I will absolutely do that.
All right. We are at 4:30, so let's do our wrap up. So we have a survey for you to tell us what you thought of today's meeting. And if you would like to present at a future meeting, we have a new form for you to fill out there. I know that a lot of you may have reached out in the past and just said, yeah, I'm interested. And if you could go back and fill out this form, help give us a little bit more information, including your contact information, that would be really helpful for us. It'll also give us an idea of when you might want to present, so we don't have to just email you individually and ask. Our next HE Tug meeting is on May 12th from 3:30 to 5 Eastern. The link is there for you to register for that. And the May meeting is going to be a little bit different from our typical meetings. We are having a back to basics special called We Put the Fun in Fundamentals. And this is just going to be some real basic stuff for anyone who's kind of new to Tableau. We've got a guest speaker coming in for that. We are going to show some formatting, and we're going to show some calculations. And I can't stress enough, if you know anybody who's just starting out and they would like a real good basic introduction, this is going to be a great Tug meeting in May. And then last but not least, the Tableau conference is May 17th through 19th. If you have any interest in a virtual watch party, reach out and let us know, because we have kind of talked about throwing around some ideas, maybe making that happen. And I also think there's a link in the chat box for the Tableau photo booth, which is already open and up and running. To answer your question, Sasha, we are going to send out the recording for this meeting sometime next week, as soon as they have a chance to edit and post. I think we have one more slide with our important links. Don't think we have time for breakout rooms today, but that's okay, because we have some really great presentations, and there's always next time. Roshni, anything you want to say before we wrap up for the day?
No, you said it all. We hope you had a super time at this National Superhero Day Tableau user group.
I know I did. Definitely learned
I did too.
From everyone.
Yeah, it was great. You guys were all great presenters, and thanks to everyone for all the questions that you posted as well. Thanks, and we'll see you in a couple weeks, hopefully.